The title of this podcast is What is the Right School in Miami?
So my goal is really to educate families about the different options for schools.
Joining us is Valeria Avirett, a Miami-based school advisor and relocation consultant who's helped countless families navigate one of the city's toughest challenges, finding the right school. Known for her transparent, hands-on approach, Valeria works across both private and public systems, guiding parents through admissions, interviews, and placement to ensure their children thrive in Miami's competitive education landscape.
Ultimately, what I want to do is empower parents to make informed decisions and to do their research well so they can be at a place for many years.
Get ready for an eye-opening conversation on Miami's private school landscape, from the realities of competitive admissions to the emotional decisions families face when relocating. Learn how to find the right school, not just the most prestigious one. This is Better Decisions.
Welcome back to the Better Decisions podcast. In this episode, I am here with Valeria Avirett, who is a school advisor, guide, mentor. You wear a lot of different hats. Coach. The title of this podcast is What is the Right School in Miami? Okay, it's a big question and it covers a lot of grounds, but we titled it as that because this is all about helping families navigate the private school system in Miami. And I know there's so much chatter every year, and it all started in 2022, 23, when there's a big migration was happening. Before we get into that, let me start off by allowing you to introduce yourself. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think this is one of the subjects that, even though I'm a real estate broker, I'm also a parent. I have two daughters. They're at Gulliver School. I've been through the SSATs. I've been through the process of relocating 154 families in 2022 when the pandemic occurred. And I had direct conversations with all of these families about, the first thing was, even before, okay, let's help me find a house or a condo, it was, tell me about the schools. It's the most important question, I think, when we deal with families. So without further ado, Valeria, thank you for doing this. Please introduce yourself to the audience and let them know who you are and what you do.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm an avid fan and I watched you through the years, and I'm always very impressed with your team and the impact that you've had in the city. So it's an honor for me to be here. I think we share a common goal, and is to make families happy.
Yes.
Certainly, we also deal with probably what will be one of their most important decisions in their life. I'm dealing with their children, which are something that they treasure. For those families who are relocating, I'm also dealing with setting a foundation in the city. So my goal is really to educate families about the different options for schools. I primarily focus in preschool through 12th grade. I would say about half my clients are parents who are new to the city. And although they might have been here for quite a long time, they didn't attend a school here, so are completely unfamiliar with what the options are. What makes me unique, too, is the fact that I work with private schools and I also work with public schools. So I know the Miami-Dade County School District pretty well. And this is kind of a personal mission. I had kids. I had a pretty solid corporate career in communications. And after having kids, all of a sudden, I didn't want to go back to a very demanding job and delve into relocation. We had lived abroad as expats and really understood what a move entails and how important an education in a community is. I also had quite a bit of trouble trying to find the right school for my two boys, and it was quite frustrating. I made a couple of different mistakes, and at the end, I walked out winning and learning a lot. So I felt I was in a position to help others. So ultimately, what I want to do is empower parents to make informed decisions and to do their research well so they can be at a place for many years. Having a great school at the beginning will really open opportunities in the future.
So you said you were an expat, so coming through and moving with kids. And I was doing I try to research these podcasts and not just come and wing it, but I was doing some research and I said, give me some statistics of moving with kids and the process of that. And I want to get into as we go through this, the psychology of this, because I think if we understand our own personal thought processes and our own personal psychology, sometimes our own psychology, our own fears and our thoughts can betray us. They can betray our better decisions because we're running off just emotion.
Yes.
And that emotion, one of the strong emotions that we might be running off might be fear, just straight up fear, which obviously is not probably the best place to come from any angle. You lose optics. But there was a statistic that I read that it was actually that military kids and people, when they relocate a lot, the level of depression and anxiety that goes up within both the parents and the kids, it exponentially raises. And there was something like 79% raise in anxiety and stress with kids that move a lot. Like we're talking and like military, what you call kind of like army brats, the ones who are kind of, moving every year or so. And it affects our state of mind. And I find it interesting to deconstruct that in terms of what is it within our psychology that really affects our balance of mind and our sense of purpose. When you started the business, I'm really curious to know, like, what was it that triggered you to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do? Because I really want to understand, like, why would you start the business? Was there something that happened?
Yes. So we came back to Miami, and my children were 4 and 1.5, and I needed flexibility. So I, like a lot of people do, I got a real estate license, and I worked in relocations. There's so many opportunities, so many different companies, but my goal was really to connect with people who were coming from abroad or were moving to Miami. I got to Miami many years ago, and I'm going to date myself, but it was like 1993. And I've seen the city under so many different lights that I felt that the biggest value I could provide is like to really talk about the community and what the city offers. Oftentimes, we ended up talking about neighborhoods and places, but it was consistent that all my clients, their first question was always, where are the schools? What's the best school? And that led me to believe there's a business here. Miami, as we all know it, is a relatively a new city, and there's so many industries and services that are yet to launch. So at that point, 8 years ago, I thought, well, I'm going to be a school consultant. This is something very niche, but I believe that people will be interested in hiring me to fully understand, because I will save them time. And at this point, after 8 years, you're not only talking with somebody who's had a number of experiences navigating various schools and various application processes, but I have a large network. A large network as a parent through my friends who I've seen their children evolve, and also with my clients. This yesterday, actually, I met up with one of my first original clients.
Right.
And they were,
how long ago was that? When did you work with them?
They were getting ready to go to pre-K 3 and kinder, and now they're getting ready to go to high school. So it's pretty rewarding. I quickly realized too that I really enjoy the emotional component. Right? And it goes back to what we were talking about, in our discussions, the why. Right? It made me realize that for me, it fulfilled me incredibly to make a difference in these people's lives.
I can relate to that, by the way. I think I've done this for more than 15 years, and I look now at some of the clients that I've got, and when I first started working with them, their kids were babies, and now they're at college. They're in high school and college, and I've seen these transitions, and you live their life with them. You live vicariously through their eyes, and you see these transitions as they go through, and you see the different cadence of the life and the different stages. And then you get the call, and then the call is, look, they're going to school, and then the call is they're going to college, and then the call is, we don't need the house anymore, we want the condo. And you go through it, and then it's like, hey, now the kids, they need a house, will you sell them a house? And that's a really it's life through a lens that you rarely see, but I get to live these entire life cycles, which is, it's incredibly emotional, sometimes very rewarding. Yeah. You mentioned that you were dealing with the relocations, and I deal with it. We often know a lot, and we see a lot of relocation companies. Can you just outline the defining difference between what these relocation companies do and what you do? Because I see a lot of relocation companies and they're not all the same. Some are good and some are bad, but I think that a consultant like yourself, you're operating very differently than these relocation companies.
Absolutely. And I'm flattered you mentioned that, because that's really, truly our value proposition. It's a personalized approach. I'm not cookie cutter. I'm not cutting and pasted information from the internet. It's really objective. Also, our model, I don't receive any incentives from any school.
Yeah.
What I do is provide a service.
So are you suggesting then that there are relocation companies who do receive incentives from schools?
No, not at all. What I'm saying is that there's a lot of perhaps school guides that operate more on an advertisement basis, right? You get listed in a school guide, or you participate in a publication because you're buying advertisement, right? I feel that our objective is to be as transparent as possible and to really understand what the family needs.
Yeah.
Right?
You lose the bias. You want to get rid of the bias.
Yeah. So my goal is to problem solve too, right? We know that admission to private schools is extremely competitive. I want to make sure that I help you understand the process and be as prepared as possible. So you're doing, parents will be doing a lot of the work, but I'm coaching them along the way and making sure that we can elevate that application so that student stands out.
And the relocations companies, they're not doing this. This is not part of their MO.
Well, some do. I think, and we found out that a lot of the school names will be the same, right? We're working with a finite number of options.
Yeah.
But sometimes we have tough discussions, right? Like maybe the school is not right for you, so we need to look for alternatives.
Yeah.
Right. So I actually worked with families that have worked with relocation companies. That hasn't worked out, and they don't have any options.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but I'm glad we got a chance. And I didn't know. I mean, this wasn't rehearsed, by the way, talking about relocation companies. It wasn't even in my notes. But I have seen a lot of companies, a lot of people move here using relocation companies who are based somewhere else, and they take such a hefty percentage from the agents and from other parties, and they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. Absolutely no idea. They're not in the city. They don't know the city. They don't have the contacts. They are literally just putting their hand out, but they tie in with these companies so effectively that they're like, well, we're moving everybody. So we have the job. We're organizing the moving companies. We're getting them into the city. We're aligning them with the agents. But they don't know who they're aligning them with. They actually don't do the research. They don't know. They just like, oh, that seems a good person. And then they'll call. And I've had it all the time. They'll call me up and say, we want to refer someone to you. We want 40% of your commission. And I'm just like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not. It doesn't, to me, that doesn't seem like you're looking after their interests. Normal referral should be like 25%. That I have no problem with. But at that level, I'm seeing a lot of these companies, and I feel like grabbing these people who are moving and saying, you do realize that these people do not have your best interests at heart because they don't even know the market. They don't understand it. You live here. You do. So, but that's my, me standing on my soapbox for 2 seconds, but I'm going to get off now.
We absolutely, we still work with a lot of those companies. I still come as an independent, vendor in some cases because there's problems to fix, right? And there's families that need schools. But oftentimes too, it's also the employer realizing that executive and their family needs this type of service. We, for sure, like I personally have worked with a lot of local, big industries here and big companies. I've met with the Beacon Council trying to develop corporate relationships with
Council very well.
A lot of these big companies here, but sometimes budgets are tight and they don't necessarily see it as a need.
So let's dive into the actual process, because I think a lot of people are saying, okay, now I understand what you're doing, but how do you work through it, and why is it so needed? Like, what is the problems that we have right now? Because Miami has grown so fast, and there's so many kids applying to so many schools. How do you navigate? What are the things you want to say out there to the parents to help them, guide them through? Because they're all thinking right now, I asked my wife this question. I said, what was the question that you would ask? And she said, the one question that I would ask is, if I'm coming from a different city and I don't know anyone here, and I'm hearing that a lot of the spaces are really being held for kids because they're familiar with the private schools here, they're familiar with the St. Thomas and the St. Stephen's and all the other schools around that are what I call feeder schools.
Yes.
They're getting more of a priority because they know there's relationships there. So these people move in feel at a disadvantage. How do you guide them? How does that work?
I think it starts by really understanding where they're coming from, right? What lifestyle are they trying to tap into when they move to Miami? What are their needs, and what do the kids enjoy about the school, right? We first need to understand what your need is to really tailor our approach in service you best. I would say that...
What does that mean? Like when you say tailor best, what are the different types of things you have to consider?
I would say for sure budget, right? Budget, location, long-term plan in Miami will definitely play a role, right? Are you in town for a couple of days or a couple of years?
What are private schools? I mean, I know the answer to this, so it's somewhat rhetorical, but for those who don't know out there, what are you paying these days for private school education in Miami?
It's hefty. It's hefty because there's a wide gap between parochial schools and private schools. So you could be paying as high as $40,000 a year.
Yep.
40, 45, actually.
I was going to say, it's a little bit more.
Yes, with the extra fees. And it keeps going up, right?
This is not just this is like the annual fees that you got for the school. And I'm not complaining about this at all. But it's the fees, and then there's stuff on top of that too.
Yes. So how much are you willing to pay? What is your plan in Miami? Will be important. And then we can design a plan and list a series of schools and options that would suit those requirements. We work a lot also with public schools, right? There's sometimes moves that happen, and that employee and that family doesn't have years or months to plan. This summer, I got to work with several wonderful families who were advised that they were moving down to Miami over the summer, right? So my number one goal is to find you a school. So there's a lot of teaching, learning, and depending on the family and whether or not they appreciate how much information I can share will vary, right? We can take an approach that could be as wide or as deep as possible. After you know your options, and we also have a strategy, and we recommend people make sure you're applying at least at a minimum to 3 different schools, so you have options. From there, of course, some people may or may not receive the best news when it's time for admission decisions. So we're quickly able to reassess and sometimes come up with a plan B or a plan C, because my number one goal will be for them to have a great school. That sometimes also requires some commitment and flexibility from the family where, okay, I tell them, look, like we have to take a step back before we take a step forward. But I guarantee you that the future is bright.
So when you say what do you mean by a step back?
Will be like perhaps a family, for example, that sometimes is quite common. Brazilian families are coming from a school in Brazil where they end the year in December, right? Yeah. Private schools nowadays, very hard to accept a mid-year admission. So they might, not settle, but they might opt to go to a school for only 6 months and then go to their desired school.
Is it hard to get in mid-year?
Yes.
Rather, it's not easier to get in mid-year. So if somebody wants to get in December, it's going to be more difficult than if they were to apply to get in.
Absolutely. It's very hard nowadays. Before the pandemic, I was able to accomplish that for a few families. But nowadays, we're talking that all the schools are at capacity. And it's really difficult.
Is it all schools? Are we talking public and private?
Magnet schools continue to be extremely competitive, and those have admissions that depend on a lottery. So if they missed a lottery and the school is full, yes, unfortunately, you're not.
So for playing ignorant for a second, what are these like different categories of schools so people can understand? Because down the street we have Sunset Elementary, yes. And they'll be like, okay, so this is a magnet school with an IB program.
Yeah, with an IE and an IS, yeah, international studies.
So what does that mean? So for those out there who are trying to pick schools, what are the different denominations and different, like what's magnet and what's IS, and how do you, like, what do those look like so people can understand what the options are?
Yes. So private independent schools, right? They have a pretty standard admission process that starts in September, and you are offered admission in March by the March 1st. Public school, on the other hand, there's an incredible variety, especially in South Florida, because we have your assigned neighborhood school. And you also have these various programs that have been in place for a number of years where kids can focus on a specific subject. In elementary school, that typically relates to languages. So kids have the opportunity to learn French, German, Spanish, Portuguese. As they get older, these magnet programs become more specific. You can graduate with an international baccalaureate. You can go through the Cambridge. You can pursue perhaps Master Academy in Key Biscayne that is all about marine biology. So magnet programs offer a specific track of study. They're very unique because they have a standard application process and there are deadlines that need to be met.
Okay. Can you name some of the schools in these areas? Like we're obviously sitting right here in South Miami, which is surrounded by Coconut Grove, Coral Gables, Pinecrest to the south. Obviously got Miami Beach and areas. Can you name some of these schools so people can do a little bit of like
a little research? Absolutely. So everybody has a friend or a family. So you've heard about Sunset.
Yes.
There's also West Lab.
So Sunset Elementary.
Sunset Elementary, West Lab.
Okay.
One of my favorite.
Where's West Lab?
West Lab is right next to University of Miami.
Okay.
Beautiful location. It really is a very intimate environment because, a lot of the public schools, one of the challenges is the fact that they have thousands of students. Mm-hmm. West Lab is definitely a school that will feel intimate because it's K through 8 and it's small. We don't have, around 800 students or so. So West Lab, one of my favorites is Carver Elementary. Okay. You'll find it on Grand Avenue. You've probably driven by their military. Love that principal. And that one has evolved to offer Italian and Spanish as far as languages. Adam Merritt, if you're a Brazilian coming to Miami, I would say Adam Merritt is definitely a school you need to consider because they have a 60-40 approach where 40% of the instruction is in the foreign language.
Okay.
So there's proficiency tests. As student gets older, middle school will have a couple of options that relate to still languages, but also the arts. Right around the corner here down the street is South Miami Middle, which offers at least 5-6 different tracks in the arts. If you like to draw, visual arts, violin, orchestra, band, theater, photography. So there's endless opportunities.
And as you go south, I'm thinking of like one famous school, Palmetto High School, which is where,
Amazon, Big Chief.
Of course, yeah.
Yes, I love that in the presentation.
Bezos went to. So again, and these campuses, these are, once you get into the high school, these are bigger schools.
Yes.
Bigger schools. So you got
I would say
Palmetto and
Coral Reef is the one that leads the pack in terms of high school because it has about 3,000 students in a variety of programs. Incredible environment. The one challenge with magnet schools sometimes is the fact that they tend to be rigorous, right? So the work will be hard.
And they're not always easy to get into. Even like schools, I'm thinking like schools like Pinecrest Elementary. These are still competitive schools.
Yeah, so Pinecrest is a zone. The district does have a program where families and people that might not necessarily live in the neighborhood can pursue an opportunity.
But the majority of kids coming there, and this is part of the understanding of the geography, and again, where you live, I typically will say, all right, they'll identify the schools, but a lot of them may cross over. So as long as you're within a certain catchment area, you've got multiple choices.
Yes, and we left this for last, but there's also the charter schools. The charter schools have been pretty strong in South Florida, and a lot of them are great. Heavily academic, typically a smaller environment. I would say that the only challenge sometimes with charter schools is the fact that they've taken over spaces.
Yeah.
Right? They're office buildings, churches, but we've seen in the last few years quite an investment. Like matter brick off the highway you've probably driven by, and it's pretty impressive.
I'm seeing as Miami expands, and now we'll get into the private schools, because again, more often than not, I have just me personally with the client base that I have, because of the type of product that I sell, it's a lot of families who are focused on the private school. And again, the big ones that we all talk about in this area, there's Ransom, which is classified as like number one in the state. And there's Carrollton, which is a phenomenal girls' school. There's Gulliver, where my kids go, which is an amazing school. It's the 5th largest private school in the US. And then obviously from there, you've got Palmer as well, which is a little further south. You've got Westminster. You've got the boys' school of Belém, Columbus, Riviera. And then obviously as people go up, further north, you've got Country Day, Cushman. There's a lot of these schools around, but I just feel like there's not enough of them. I feel like there's a big amount of demand for that, which is, I guess, when it gets into the meat and potatoes, when a lot of my clients, you just had a conversation with one of my clients today.
Yes.
And it was like, okay, I'm wanting to move here, but I'm really looking for a space for my kids. And I'm constantly getting calls, and I'm making private introductions to the heads of schools. But how they navigate, I guess, what are the common questions that these private school families are asking you? What are their biggest challenges, and how are you overcoming those?
I think the number one would be, how can I elevate my application, right? Do I stand a chance? What do I need to do to get in? I think it's continues to be quite competitive. Apart from Gulliver, like some of our elementary schools, that Episcopal group of schools, are relatively pretty intimate communities.
Yeah. My girls went to St. Thomas. Phenomenal school, by the way.
Yes.
But it's been very challenging. I've got a friend of mine right now. He's been through 3 years applying to get into the school.
Yes.
And it was tough. I mean, he just started to engage with me now over this because we became friends now. But I'm like, okay, now I'm going to frog march him into the school and sit down with the head of the school and try and see what we can do to help. But again, not everyone has that advantage.
I think one of the key things to consider is time. The timing of the application and the effort you put in the application will matter. And it is important for those people to understand that, it might be that a place like Gulliver is not right for you. So we need to talk about alternatives. And that's oftentimes where I tell the parents, like, look, I'm trying to find the right school for your family.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they come having talked to a friend or having looked at a ranking online. And I said, it's not necessarily about which is the school that takes the top place. Is the school that's going to serve you best? I think Miami is quite transient in opportunities. Although those schools are at capacity, some schools will open a limited number of spaces year after year. The competition is definitely fierce. I think where I've seen the biggest challenges is for families that are applying to elementary school.
Yeah.
Parents are opting for private schools sooner than later. And I also think that parents want certainty, right? I have talked to so many parents who say, I want to end up in Ransom. What do I do?
Yeah.
Or I want to go to Harvard. My kid was
overachieving parents living vicariously through their kids. Yeah, that seems to be pretty toxic sometimes and pretty unhealthy. And it's a lot of pressure to put on a small child and saying, well, I went to Harvard, so you should go to Harvard. It doesn't seem to build probably the most psychologically robust mindset in the child when you're forcing that.
I mean, just the Wall Street Journal recently published an article talking about the Ivies, right? Sometimes it's not necessarily about that. And I think with young parents also, they need to understand there's so many variables and things that eventually you won't be able to control. And part of it is that student development. You don't know if you're going to eventually have a kid who needs special accommodations, or you'll be tackling a specific learning difference. And
I want to get into that because I have my own personal experiences in that really candidly. I mean, I think it's a really important thing to understand who your child is and being honest with who they are. I think sometimes people want to believe, like, everybody believes their baby's the most beautiful, and everybody believes their child is special. And it's like, oh, he's so smart, he tied his shoelaces. And I'm like, yeah, but there are certain things that with some kids, they're just built differently.
Yes.
And I definitely want to go into that. Before we do, I wanted to go into like when the application process, because we were kind of covering that a little bit. How do people get it wrong? Like, there's obviously good ways of paying attention and doing it in a timely manner and, really, but how do you screw it up? How do you see families make applications for private schools and do it wrong? What's the wrong way of doing it?
Doing it too quickly or doing it late. But late, like, the day before the deadline. Like this, the application, when the application portal opens and that application is available, you want to start filling it out, because that's only the first step in a series of various steps and requirements, including interviews for parents or interviews for students. You have to prepare the student for standardized tests. So not planning in advance is definitely a weak point, I would say, and also not taking it seriously. I think you have to be nowadays pretty intentional with your story. Yeah. You said it like, oh, my kid it's brilliant, he's so intelligent. I don't want to hear that in application questions, right? Like, give me examples, give me the narrative. I think if you have younger children, the schools are also trying to figure out who you are as a family, what your values are.
That's a really good point. I'm really glad you raised that, because I know that when my kids went to St. Thomas, they weren't just bringing my kids to the school. It was about bringing us as a family into the school. They were as concerned about who I was and who my wife was as much as who the kids were, because you are a big family. I mean, they always say with St. Thomas now, it's kind of like it's a big family environment, and you don't want to be the dysfunctional uncle who screams at everyone. They don't want that. They want really good people. And they looked at us and said, you're nice people, you care, you want to be involved in the community, you want to be good players in the system, you want to support the school. And I'm not talking financially throwing money at it, I'm talking about being present.
Yes.
And I think participating. And it was very much seen as that's why they wanted us. It wasn't, and we see it sometimes, families come down and they think that if they throw money at the problem, that's enough. Which I think it does the opposite. It comes across as obnoxious, and then it comes across as you're trying to buy your way in.
Yes,
which doesn't work.
And I think also because sometimes that comes up in some of our discussions with our clients, right? And it's, well, you know what, Miami has reached new heights. So for how much are you going to write that check for? Like that's like really,
there's too many billionaires who live in the city for you to play that game.
There's other ways. There's other ways, and also like there's other ways and strategies depending on the school, right? Like who do you know? Where are your contacts? What are you trying to make? What are you building?
I think that's so important. That's why so many people I've gone in to the schools with these families. I've had calls with them, and I've called up the head of admissions and I've called up the head of school, and I said, these are really good people. Let me tell you the story of how I met them and how I know them, because these are the type of people that you want. You want people who will champion the school. Yes. And I've had the pleasure of being able to meet with the admissions counselors and the heads of schools for many of these schools over the years, mainly because I'm interested in their story. So I had the head of admissions I've done the interviews in the podcast for the head of admissions for Palmer, for St. Thomas, for Gulliver. Did a wonderful one with Simon Hess at Gulliver. And I got to really know him, what he stood for, what the school stood for. Which actually really mattered to me in the end when we applied for the school. It was like, okay, here's someone who gets it.
Yes. And I think that I want to reiterate that is something that every family needs to do. Do the research well and make sure you connect and hear other stories beyond what you see in an admission portal, right? Like visit, talk, get inspired. I absolutely loved all the videos. Debbie Lickner is like one of my
she's a sweet. I love Debbie.
Yes, and she has supported me in this journey as I was launching the company, and I've sent so many wonderful families there. But she was absolutely right. Like everybody needs to understand what they can bring to the school and what the school is looking for.
Yes.
I often tell parents, look, all these school applications are important. you represent kind of like one piece of a quilt, right? The school is putting together a quilt and you're one patch. So we just have to see what the rest of the patch looks like, but just tell me and tell them in a very honest and intentional way, what are you bringing in? What are your colors? Like, what do you truly stand for and what you represent?
Yeah. I think that has so much to do with it now, especially because community is key. And I think moving, when I was doing the notes for this podcast, is I wanted to dive into the psychology of moving and when people move, how they go through this, because I feel like there's a lot of weight and it's very emotional. And obviously with our kids, it's the most emotional thing that we have. And very often in business, I get hired to be calm, rational, to have clarity. It's not that I'm cold, but I see things more clearly because I don't have the emotional involvement or crutch that these individual clients have. And by having that lack of that emotional involvement, I have more clarity. I can make better decisions, hence the name of the podcast. And the entire motto of the company, of the David Siddons Group, is better decisions. In this case, it's about better decisions for kids. And I think that comes in line sometimes that we think we're making the right decisions for our kids, but we're not. We've been somewhat brainwashed, socially conditioned to believe that we need to go one certain way. And I think generationally now that might be changing. I don't know if you're seeing that.
For sure. It's kind of a herd mentality, right? And in Miami, I feel can feel like that sometimes because somebody tells you, "Oh, this school is great. You should go. You should apply." No, I'm gonna prove you're wrong. You need to do your research, and you need to see it for yourself.
Yeah,
it's not what people tell you. Everybody has family, a friend, or a network here that will tell you about the school. Right? But you just have to remain confident and independent that this decision involves more than just what people are doing or people are saying.
I think people see it as well. The heads of admissions and the schools notice that when you're going in there, and I noticed when I see the families who get in, what I've seen is that those ones who do the research, who go to the school, who really visit the counsellors and really feel it and they go with the kids, they tune in very quickly and say, yep, that's the one. Mm-hmm. And they have no problem with voicing to the head of the school and the admissions counsellors, you are our first choice. You're our first, middle, and last choice. We want to be with you. It's when you start applying for multiple schools and you're like, I don't really mind. I'll go into anyone because my kid's so smart, he'll get into any of these schools. And those ones, it's not just about the grades. Yeah, it's how they're. So when you're seeing them, how they're measuring up, what would you say to the families? Because sometimes people think, well, they've got to sit the exam and the better they score, then they'll just get in. What are the criteria that they need to be more aware of when, let's say, if you're looking at someone's, admission form, like if it's like a CV, it's not a CV, but if it was like a CV, what are the characteristics that they're really looking for?
I think it depends at what point in time you're applying. So for elementary school, what I see is student readiness is crucial. Right, all these. If you're applying to a lower grade, it's important to really present yourself as a family. But when it comes to the student, that student also needs to be ready to detach from a family and ready also to take on that load early on for some of the most competitive schools. As the students get older, I think in middle school, is a completely holistic approach in some of these schools, right? Depending on where you're applying, some things will have more value than the other. I do get asked a lot, okay, my student didn't do that well on the SSAT. They flunked the IC. Like, what do we do? Do we even stand a chance? I'm going to be honest. In some of the schools, for sure, the exam is critical. It will be like a relay race. The exam will take you so far. Yeah. But then there's always so many various elements. How active are you after school? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? Extracurriculars in a meaningful way. As if you're talking about a ninth grader, where do you see yourself? Some of these schools nowadays offer so many incredible opportunities to get really deep into different subjects. It's like beyond history and science. right?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something I want to touch on in the dialogue, because I think one of the things is we're in a very changing world. I raised this with Simon Hess, and the title of that podcast, and if you guys haven't seen it, please watch it. How do we prepare our children for a changing world? And given that they're changing, and there's a subject that I wanted to get into, and before I forget, it's about the different types of kids we have. And I think that kind of ties in with changing world. Changing kids are changing, just the way they're put together, the way we're realizing that they're put together. My eldest daughter is ADHD. Brilliant. Out of the box thinker. But in certain areas, she has more challenges. She doesn't do as well in certain areas than others. And because her brain doesn't engage in the same way. But when she's engaged, she's hyper-focused, which is a very atypical attribute of ADHD children. And we're seeing more and more neurodiversity, as it's labeled, more and more neurodiversity across the board. And I think in the world, I think people are recognizing it. Now there's so many stories of like, let's look at incredible leaders who had ADHD, people who are inventors, creators, ones who have founded, again, people who reshaped the world. I say reshaped, they're out of the box because they didn't even think there was a box to begin with. So they've now said, well, the status quo doesn't have to be the status quo for me. I'm going to do it a different way. And that's where they've pioneered computers, flight, technology, AI, whatever it might be. Yeah. The world is what it is today because of people like that.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I live in a house of neurodivergency every day. You know, my kids also, we went through that journey for sure. And when I talk to them and I talk to my families who need special kind of support, whatever they need, I said, do not be intimidated and do not be afraid. This is a superpower. It's how you harness that superpower that will take you places. So in your case, that hyperactivity might translate to being really eager to learn. So what I've found also, that is a conversation that needs to happen and be addressed typically in the younger years, because as kids mature and they get ready to be more independent, by the time they get to high school, if that student has been offered support and knows how to self-advocate, will be, whining and dining and studying with the traditional classroom setting.
But those who don't, it's a disaster. It can be disaster.
Yes, it's a matter of time. You have to tackle it early on.
Yeah, I thank my wife for doing this, because she was aware when our oldest was very young, and she said, I can see this. And a lot of the people that she would see would say to her, it's good that you're reacting like this, because so many parents want to stick their head in the sand and say, no, it's fine, they're fine. And it's not. And by the time they get around to addressing it, when the child is 11, 12, 13, they've had a lot of issues, and that kid's developed a lot of stress and anxiety and neuroses around who they are, and they have a much, much harder time than accepting it and not feeling bad about themselves in the process. Sometimes it can really affect confidence. Right. And when they go, okay, it's not the end of the world for me. It's just how it is.
I think when a student is approaching middle school, it's all about having confidence, right? And reassuring that student that it's not a big deal to be different. You just learn in a different way. You're completely, like the book says, you're differently wired.
Yeah. It's a different operating system.
Yes, different operations system, but they're poised for success.
Yeah.
A lot of kids, you said it, a lot of inventors and a lot of entrepreneurs are neurodivergent.
Yeah, I am ADHD myself. And I think I can think very quickly in multiple levels. Other areas I'm not great at, but I know when I'm good in a particular area, I can switch it on, and it's ahead of the curve. Yeah. And you have to recognize that. And once you understand where you can excel and you tune into that, then you can also be happy, because then you're in flow state. You're in a natural flow state of being, and you're actually enjoying what you're doing, because that's what you were built for. You're being true to yourself, not trying to force yourself into a way of behavior or work, which down the line, as we get employed, we don't want to end up doing a job that we're just not built for, because then we're just miserable.
Yes. And those are conversations that we have for sure with our families. If they have a differently wired kid, what are their needs, right? When you get to middle school, it's all about developing executive functioning, making sure that student stays on track and is turning in homework, is checking in with a teacher. I find also that sometimes the very hyperactive kids need movement. So you need a school that will offer plenty of opportunity to run around, to be outdoors, to be in a setting that perhaps will be more project-based as opposed to just listening to the teacher speak.
What do you think that families can enjoy by moving down to Miami in terms of how the schools are now being built and structured? Because you mentioned like movement, and I know that we live like it's just nearly October and look out the window, blue sky, and it's great. My kids are probably out playing volleyball right now, soccer, or God knows what they're doing, but they're outside. And I think that that's one of the amazing things that we have. We have space for kids, but we also have a lot of other things. Are you seeing the schools? And what are you seeing within schools right now that is allowing them to develop with a lot of variety and let's say the tools for children, young adults to develop skills in areas that are less traditional, less of the like obvious? What is open to them?
I feel that this Miami was discovered by the world, right? We all lived a pretty normal life. We knew that Miami was different, was exotic. We hear Spanish in every single corner.
Yeah.
And nowadays, people here are moving for the lifestyle. Families can stay outdoors and have a great time. What I tell them is the lifestyle here is going to be incredibly unique, right? We have in Miami one of the most diverse communities. Because it's incredibly transient, we also are open to meeting and making new connections. This is not a place where you're going to be living for a few years and you're not going to make any friends.
Yeah.
You settle and you can easily make a village. Diversity, multilingual, so many different stories and so many different paths can be found in Miami. I tell people Miami can be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
You want to make sure, though, that you have the right foundation, right?
And the right people to be around.
Right. And we have our challenges. Infrastructure is still kind of a little dodgy.
Well, it's playing catch up to a massively grown population. And again, infrastructurally, I think some areas are better than others, though. I think some areas of the city, like when you get into the urban core, it gets very congested and then, traffic goes up. And we need to get into the whole infrastructural element and notably around commuting time to schools, because this is really important. I did a little research on that. You'll be happy to know. And I was looking at like the importance of how far you need to be from your kid's school. Because it's not just the school, in fact. It was all the extracurricular things that you're going to do. My two daughters, one of them goes to the Royal Ballet in Coral Gables, Merrick Park. At the same time, my eldest one is playing soccer in the Coral Gables school opposite, and she's practicing there before season starts. Then they've got a volleyball game down at school. And all these things happen within a 20-minute driving distance from our house. And I think it's also important because all the friends live within a close by proximity to the school and to all these clubs. And God, there is a lot of them. I mean, again, you find yourself like, I want to go horse riding this weekend, or if I want to do soccer, or if I want to do ballet, or if I want to go play volleyball, if I want to do sailing. And there's so many things that these kids get to do. It's really unbelievable. I mean,
all year round.
It's like golf. I mean, I've got a friend, her son, Chris here, her son's an avid golfer. I've got another friend, his son, avid sailor. Another friend, the daughter does horse riding. I mean, again, these are very kind of like time-consuming, rather expensive hobbies, but sports, but giving them a chance to try this stuff. And of course, still, there's American football, there's soccer. I still can't call it soccer. I have to call it football because it's the British in me. But, soccer, football, whatever you want to call it. And then there's baseball, and there's so many of these great parks. And I've loved nothing more than going with my eldest daughter, Chloe, and watching her play soccer every Saturday since she was 3 or 4, and I love it. And she probably doesn't, she loves it too until I'm there screaming at her from the sidelines, telling her to, not be offside. But it is honestly a pleasure. And I've hung out with all these parents, and they become like family. And our kids are in and out of each other's houses. and they're hanging out. And I've had God knows how many times I've driven a car full of 10, 11-year-old girls singing Taylor Swift at the top of their voice back from a soccer match to my house so they can all hang out in the pool and then have a barbecue. I mean, it's like, it's a dream life. If I get reincarnated, I want to come back as my own kids. But it is, I mean, I feel like South Florida, we have this. And we have the weather. I mean, 365, it's called the Sunshine State for a reason.
And there's so many people from so many different places that really appreciate what it offers.
Yeah.
Right? And I think the only challenge here is the traffic, like you said.
Yeah.
So yes, finding a community where all this is doable within a reasonable time is critical.
What do you advise when it comes to traffic? And this is one of the big questions. Like they'll choose a school or schools and they say, okay, let's look at the houses around the area. In your opinion, what is the, I won't say the ideal, because the ideal time is like 30 seconds, but what is probably the maximum amount of time that you tell families you should be in a car to take your kids to school in the morning?
I would say probably no more than half hour. I mean, that's ideal. Unfortunately, by the time you get to middle school, parents are driving their kids somewhere.
Yeah.
Everybody is driving somewhere. Families who live in the Gables might be driving to Berlin all the way west and coming back. Families in the North Gables might be driving all the way to Westminster in Palmetto Bay.
Yeah.
So
and they have buses now. I know they have the bus system.
Yes.
They did a study on this. This is part of my research. So they did a study and they found out, there's a study out of Bath University in the United Kingdom. God bless the Brits for their research. I guess the weather's crap, so they've got to do something. They busy themselves with academia. But they said the ideal distance is 20 minutes. There's no mental drop-off for that time. Half an hour is the maximum ideal time. Why? So they said 30 minutes there's a cutoff point. And the reason they said that wasn't for what I thought. They said, because if you travel for more than that, the amount of sleep that they need is affected. You have to get up too early. You get back too late. It eats into your day. There's the kids' workloads right now with homework, with after-school activities, means that they don't have a lot of time to just do nothing. I feel like my kids through the day, through the evening, they get home, they have homework to do, they've got activities to do, and by the time, and I want them in bed I'm quite strict as a parent, I want them in bed by 8:30, 8:45 latest, because they need their sleep. They need 8-9 hours of sleep. And I know that otherwise we then have to get up. By the time they sleep, it's 9 o'clock and they're up at 6. That's ideally that's 9 hours, but they're growing kids and they need that. Otherwise they're cranky. I mean, you drag anybody out of bed too early and you keep doing that over and over again. Half an hour is the cutoff point. Beyond that, there was a point where I think about 45 minutes, it starts to show levels of anxiety and depression and other stresses, because they now become further away from the center of their life. They become further away from where their friends live. They become further away from the activities that they have to go to. And they have a lot of time basically traveling, doing nothing, not being particularly happy. Human beings, as adults, we have the same thing. If we have to spend, too much time driving, we're wasting our time. We're not being productive. And the time is the asset, the one thing that we can't make.
So, and for sure, I've seen some families having to sacrifice that, right? The priority remains to be very close to the school, and then the dad would commute. And he's the one, or she's the one, taking the Brightline.
There's a divide and conquer.
Yes, all the way from Broward. If there was a better option in Broward, and we work a lot also in Fort Lauderdale, that family might be commuting on the Brightline all the way down to Brickell. Or all the way from Boca. So we've seen it happen.
That's challenging.
Yes.
So and we've covered obviously the process of what you've got to pay attention to. Now getting into the schools as they are and the changing reality. I went through the SSATs last year with my 2 daughters, and I felt, and all you families out there at St. Thomas, any of you who are watching this podcast, and any families who had their kids at St. Stephen's or St. Philip's or any of the other schools, and they went through the SSATs, God bless you. I feel for you. It was it was scary. It was emotionally a roller coaster. It was challenging. It was exhausting. There was a lot of tears. There was a lot of stress. And I feel now that those families who are coming through into Miami and they're probably getting their kids into the middle school, they're transitioning, coming into Miami and straight into middle school. I remember being told by a lot of friends, David, take a breath, don't stress, don't drink the Kool-Aid. What do you say? How do you handle the families going through the SSATs? What would you say to those families right now who are faced in that process?
Number one would be believe in your kid, right? Have faith in your kid that we'll get through it, and have confidence that the process for a lot of these schools is holistic. So the test is important. It's a portion of it. For many kids, this is the first time they're taking a pretty heavy standardized test, so it's quite a responsibility. And it's okay not to do great the first time. I work with families, and you typically advise to take the IC test, which is pretty similar. It's slightly different in some areas. And we talk about scheduling in a way that you can see if you take it once, and then maybe if that doesn't work out, you can take it again. So having the flexibility of taking that test more than once sometimes is a pretty good.
Yeah, my kids took it I want to say 3 or 4 times. They said the first time's a practice run. Don't stress it. Don't worry about it. My youngest one would overthink stuff. She would be studying at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I've got to pass it. I've got to do well. And I'm like, look, take a breath.
And the other one would be seek expertise, right? So we have a network of people that we work with.
You mean tutors?
Tutors, testing center, whether it's in person or virtual, that I think makes a difference. Mm-hmm. Getting familiarized with the timing aspect.
And a lot of tutors, you say tutors,
Well, tutors. I'm always looking too.
They're throughout we had tutors for our girls, and it certainly took some of the anxiety away and the stress and made them feel more prepared. And again, I think a lot of it was managing. I think a lot of it was actually the school was telling the parents, don't stress your kids out. The kids were okay, but they were getting stressed out by the parents. Yeah. So then we were trying to balance, and that's why we'd have a tutors, and the tutor would say, just everything's cool, okay? You guys, no one freak out. That helps a lot. Helps a lot.
I think it's also about giving up some control. So when you're applying to middle school, is the student that's driving the process. The student will be interviewed by the school, and he or she will be driving the process. And I think some parents also have a hard understanding that they need to give up control. Right?
That's a really good point. The control thing, it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I think by nature, if you have, let's say, high-performing parents who are in the top 1%, and again, that's what we're talking about. A lot of people moving into Miami, the reality is they're in the top 1% of people in the U.S. in terms of income and lifestyle. And so they know that in order to get there to that top 1%, they had to work really, really hard. But at the same time, sometimes they feel like they expect their kids to do the same from out of the gate. Yeah. And again, sometimes there's some vicarious living, but there's the anxiety. And I think giving up control and letting kids be kids and not trying to helicopter them helps a lot. Easier said than done, though.
Absolutely. I think along with a test, one aspect that maybe some parents that don't necessarily think about a lot will be the teacher recommendations and the principal recommendations. I think those are important. We were talking about what not to do, and I think fulfilling that requirement and making sure that teacher knows the student very well, and that could be put into the questionnaire or translated to the school, that kid has potential. I work sometimes with kids that not necessarily have the best grades either. So we already know out of the gate that our options will be limited. A great school will be that one that identifies that student for who he is and his potential, right? When we talk about curiosity, how that person is as a team member and a leader, those will be important things to highlight. Do they have a heart? Are they kind? Are they a good person? Are there any behavior issues? More than anything and more than the standardized test score, I feel that the teacher recommendations will also weigh heavily in the decision.
As we're moving through this I think the education system is under a lot of scrutiny right now. Right, this is going into like where we are currently, and this is more of a kind of a, as someone who's looking and understanding the education system as it sits today, because you're dealing with families and you're helping them get their kids or helping the kids get into these schools. There's been a lot of discussion about how the education system is under major change and has to be under major change, because I think the initial design of school was from post-World War II, Roosevelt making a population of people who were driven to help the country succeed, which meant working in traditional jobs back then was in factories, in an employee role, not an employer role. Today, I feel like people's motivations and desires is not to get a good job for a big company and be a nice employee. There's a lot more entrepreneurial drive. I think we're exposed to a lot more entrepreneurial opportunities. Yeah. You can build a company online through a website. You don't need 1,000 staff. They're now saying that with AI, very soon we'll have the first one-person billion-dollar company, which is mind-blowing because it will be using a lot of technical and technology AI-based tools to achieve what was otherwise impossible and required high level of human involvement. Now we've got ChatGPT, we can do a lot with that. What is your opinion, honestly, about where this school system is going? Do you see there's major change underway? And do you think that the schools are aware of that as they should be? Or do you think they need to speed up the changing process, the structured process that they have?
One of the things that helped us in Miami with this massive migration of people who had also very high benchmarks and demands, I feel that forced a lot of the schools to kind of react and innovate and improve their offering. If somebody, for example, tells me I went to Gulliver and that was 20 years ago, I'm like, okay, you need to tour, revisit, and really get to know Gulliver, because there's been tremendous growth. And I feel a lot of the schools here in Miami are keeping up with innovation and technology. And yes, a lot of the schools here, perhaps a smaller few, are really inspiring kids and generating the next group of change makers. I have some hesitation when it comes to elementary school in terms of what technology should look like. We have to remember that technology and AI, that's going to be one of the greatest inventions, but we have to remember that, and we have to remember that it's a tool. It allows us to do things better, more efficiently. When the kids are so young, we have to just be cautious that they continue to be kids. So if we're talking about AI and technology at a very early age, I want to make sure that that is introduced in a way where you're not giving up other things that are important, like being outside and playing, like pretend play, being kids and giving kids a chance to explore and also to make mistakes. Because at the end of the day, I feel that homework is meant to be homework, so you get into a routine. So as long as all these schools, when the kids are really young, continue to build the basic foundations for children to be humans, in a way. I don't want technology to come and replace the human interaction for sure. I think as the children and the students are older, perhaps one of the most fascinating areas is the fact that the new technology is allowing kids to be exposed to so many different fields. I agree that starting in middle school, kids should be exposed to a lot more subjects. Back in the day when I was a student, nobody told me about engineering. Years later, I'm thinking I probably could have been also an engineer.
There are so many things that we didn't have. Gulliver, for example, I was so impressed. They have a broadcasting department. Right. They have an entrepreneurial side, which is kind of like a Shark Tank, where kids can critically think and problem solve and come up with new ideas for business, which we never had. Originally, it was like the traditional subjects.
So that exposure, I think, will be critical. The schools that are doing that in a way of new programs, new fields, innovative teaching systems. I remember sitting in a classroom and all the seats were the same. Now you walk into certain schools and there's preferential seating. Some kids can sit on a ball. Some kids can sit on chairs that move. That's the sort of change in technology and that advancement that I really enjoy and appreciate. So it's not that it's replacing the way we're learning and teaching, but we are using it as a tool, and we're exposing kids to more so that they can continue to be very highly creative thinkers.
I love the comment that you made about doing homework to create discipline, because I think critical learning, part of the learning process. We had this conversation yesterday. You came in and before we were doing this podcast, we were discussing how we would have dialogue. And one of the interesting things was when I look back with my kids doing homework, is not what they're actually learning. I mean, you can do an equation now, and I can do it with a calculator in a nanosecond. And we would joke about doing core math. And I was like, somewhere in core math is normal math. But it's like someone inviting me to my house, and rather than going through the front door, I have to go around the back, over the pool, through the back door, and then to go through the front. It seemed to be very like, wow, this seems like a really lengthy way of doing it. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, well, maybe it isn't actually about learning how to do that, because no one's going to really use that again.
Approach.
It's the approach of learning it, and then learning the discipline to stay on subject. And there was a brilliant comment that was made actually by Sylvester Stallone, and he said, all a college degree does is it tells you, or it tells someone that's going to hire you, that you can stay relatively disciplined and focused for a period of time to achieve an objective.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then again, and you can then follow, if you're going to be an employee, to be able to follow a similar course where you're being hired to do a particular task, to stay on task for a certain period of time and achieve it to a certain degree of quality that's satisfactory to the employer. And that's all it is. Because once you come out of college and you get a job, you don't know anything. You're starting fresh.
Zero.
Like I say this when people come to me now, and I'm like, well, you have a degree, but that doesn't mean anything because you don't know anything about this industry.
Yes.
I just need to know that you could stay focused in what you did before relatively well. Otherwise, you're going to have certain mental skills or lack certain mental skills that I need in the job. I need tenacity. I need hard work. I need perseverance. I need the ability to experience friction and not fold.
And that's the only area of concern for me. Just technology also gives us instant gratification.
We talked about this yesterday.
Everything happens so quickly. So that is something that perhaps by having an approach where kids are doing a project-based learning and they have to experience it and figure out among themselves and get to that point and be patient about it. The one thing we need to be careful with technology is the instant gratification and how easy everything is. Kids still need to understand that you have to work hard to learn something and that it takes work.
Yeah.
And disappointment is okay.
It's okay to get frustrated. It's okay to be disappointed.
Wrong. It's okay. It sometimes is okay to get a bad grade.
It's actually good to be, I think it's often said that it's actually good to fail.
Yes.
Failure teaches you so many things. Success often just teaches you bad habits. If you keep being successful and you keep getting away with it,
there's no appreciation for the work.
Then you just implode. I mean, I look at the Charlie Sheen story that came out in Netflix recently, and the guy got everything all the time and never got pushback. And in the end, just kept on pushing the limits and his life imploded. But I really do feel that with kids, and I noticed this with mine, that I like to see them. That's why I like sports a lot, because sports teaches you to fail, and it also teaches you how to teamwork and to see how much grit you have. And I always say hard work will outperform talent 10 times out of 10.
Absolutely. I love, for example, the schools that offer arts programs, and an example would be like what we talked about, South Miami. There's several. That student has picked a track and will concentrate and really focus on that track and have that class for 90 minutes a day.
Yeah.
right? So you have to practice your instrument, prepare. You're part of an orchestra, you're part of a team. At the end of the day, that student is not going to be a violinist. You're not going to be playing at Carnegie Hall, but you have learned how to work in a team and be disciplined and practice your art or your skill.
So whether it's violin or ballet or soccer, you're having to experience friction and that's preparing you for life.
You're the band director, receiving feedback from early on. That's something some kids are not necessarily accustomed to.
Yeah. Where do you see it? You mentioned AI, and obviously one thing that there's an incredible podcast actually with Simon Sinek and Stephen Bartlett, Diary CEO. So if you guys want to watch something good, they actually talk about these issues with AI, and it's the immediate answer without you understanding the processes and also understanding the emotional processes that you go through. And he used a very good example where if you had an argument with your spouse and then you turned to your spouse and said, you know what, I really made a mistake. I screwed up. I understand how you feel now. I really see things differently. I should be more considerate. And it's beautifully said. And the spouse is like, oh my God, that's, my wife would say, oh, that's fantastic. You really get me. And then said, did you use ChatGPT to get that answer? If I said yes, her reaction would be very different. It would be like, no. And they explored in the process of why that was, why you wouldn't appreciate someone who wrote you a perfect email or gave you the perfect answer, or in my business, write the perfect article about real estate in the market. If you use ChatGPT to get the answer, it might be correct. It might be the right answer, but it doesn't have value.
Not genuine.
Because there's no friction to that. There's no actual learning process. So you don't appreciate it. It's like appreciating what you have. And I think that with kids, they're getting the answers almost immediately, but without fully processing the complexity emotionally of what they're dealing with. Are you seeing, and I'm curious to know your opinion, there's a rise of a lot of schools now, smaller schools, who are putting micro schools, who are putting AI as the most important thing, and they're using AI heavily to teach the kids. What do you see with that? I mean, do you see is that okay? Is there a problem with that? What's your take on that?
This is my very personal opinion, and I think some of those models are yet to be tested. I think it goes back to our earlier discussion. It really depends on the child. But I would tell parents that at the end of the day, just make sure that whatever technology is replacing, that is doubled in some other way. So if they're studying fewer hours on a specific subject, make sure that those hours are complemented, perhaps with outdoor play. There's a whole science behind how we form habits and how we learn. And I think although technology can facilitate a lot of what we do, we can still learn better if we're writing things, if we're reading things out loud and doing it physically. We all become better if we are physically doing an activity, right? So it leads me back to the homework example. So I would proceed with caution with a lot of these models. I think there are definitely some great schools out there for the right family.
Yeah.
As long as you feel that the basic human necessities of that child are met at the school, I say would be a go. In terms of imagination, setting up routines and making sure that that student is being challenged and understand that you still have to work hard, right? You have more hours in your day because school might be shorter, but what else are you doing with that day? The opportunity is for us to capitalize on those technologies to be more efficient and perhaps to use that free time that we now have to do other things.
Yeah.
And I think eventually we're going to have like a ChatGPT radar where we kind of tell like, okay, this is not somebody.
Yeah, this isn't healthy.
I think it's happening more and more.
Yeah.
A lot of the micro schools are also very small in terms of students, right? So these are small communities. You just have to make sure that there's a synergy and harmony in that group, because at the end of the day, we're sending kids to school because we want them to socially develop in the right way and understand what the role in society is.
This is actually segueing to my final point. So you timed this perfectly. And my final point, I titled Community. Community, obviously, when people are coming in and they're moving to a new city, one of the most important things is they want to make. I was with a client today and he said, I'd like to be able to be in an environment where I'm going to make friends. In this case, this particular individual said, I'm looking for to join a golf club, private golf club, because I've built a lot of my friendships in the past through being a member of a private club. In your experience, and this is somewhat school related, somewhat socially related, if you were sitting with a client, if I was a person who was just moving into Miami right now for the first time, what advice would you give me to help me build my community, my sense of to be part of a community, belonging? What were the tools you would give me, and what's the advice of what I could do to get into that, to feel part of it?
I think the school, that's where we're back to the school conversation. I think the school community is critical for you to build a village, especially if you have younger kids. That's where you're going to start making friends, for sure. And that's why I feel it's important that you visit and connect with the schools, not only on a one-on-one basis, but also attend their open houses and really start meeting other existing parents to see and feel as if you belong.
Yeah.
If you have, of course, if you have older kids that are going into high school, they tend to be a lot more independent. So
let's talk about those, because again, when the kids are very young, I would drop off my kids to St. Thomas and I would go there at Flag in the morning and I would hang out with the parents and I would see them. And now I feel as they're in middle school, parents would tell me, look, you're going to see now and again, but you're going to drop your kids off. They're going to come out the car and you're not going to be going to Flag with them. You're not walking them to the classroom. You are asked very politely, drive on.
Yes. I think that's where hobbies will play a part. Right?
So like hobbies, clubs.
Sports, sailing. There's some amazing...
There are some great clubs in Miami.
Yes.
I think it's good to mention, actually, that if you look, you've got... in the Grove, you've got several clubs right there in the heart of
sailing clubs, the Jewel.
Yeah, you've got two very good sailing clubs in the Grove. Paddleball's exploded. There's big paddleball clubs all through the city now. Lots of tennis clubs, golf clubs, and then there are other clubs as well. There's like Tuesday and Wednesday night soccer with the dads. Baseball, there's obviously a lot of sports involved. There's a lot of other things around the arts and culture.
And that has exploded in the last few years. The fact that we can now be outdoors and run without getting run over necessarily on the street under the metro. And they do a lot of activities. Yeah. I think it's important to stay out and read up. There's always something happening in Miami.
Yeah.
But you have to make it a priority. It's not going to come knocking on your door.
Yeah. You've got to be the social animal too. Yes. And I think it's healthy, and I think it's easy. I think it's easier to do it here, much easier to do it in Miami than other cities. I don't think that we have like the velvet rope experience, as I call it, where if you go to a lot of cities, there's this kind of like velvet rope private club where if you're not invited, if you don't have a special handshake, or if you don't know someone, if you're not a legacy because your grandfather didn't grow up there, you're not included. Yeah. I don't think we have that. I'm glad we don't. I think in a lot of big cities you do. There's a lot of like stifled old school mentality. I feel, thank God we don't. I think there's a lot of great, healthy ways for us to connect socially. Clubs, sports,
volunteering. Volunteering. I think it's another big opportunity.
There's a lot of great charities. There's a lot of really wonderful charities in the city. We're very fortunate that we are a very wealthy city. There is a huge migration of the top 1%. So there's a lot of philanthropy, and I think it's very important. And I think it's very commonly experienced. There's a point in your life when you wake up and you say, okay, I've made money. Well, there's got to be more to life than this.
Yes.
If my job is just to go out and just keep getting paid for whatever I'm doing, what else is there? And I think that's really important.
Yes.
And I love that. I think that's one thing that's really great about the city. And I think I hope to see that expand and continue. I would love to say that for those who are coming in, the purpose of this podcast, I think, has been really good to help particularly those who don't know Miami, to navigate their way through it and to kind of be aware of what they're going to get when they come in. And that also goes not just Miami. I run my team from Palm Beach, all the way up Palm Beach, Boca, Fort Lauderdale, through Miami, all the way down to Palmetto Bay. Each person, I have a territory manager in each area, and I found it amazing to see the variety. Miami is like 19 villages, just Miami alone, different types of people in all different areas, and there's such variety, which makes it super interesting. I think there's actually great community. I see it. I have a love for Coral Gables, Coconut Grove, Ponce Davis, where I live. I think it's been phenomenal. I love traveling through other parts of the world, but I am so glad when I come home. I think that the school system here is really, really good.
Yes.
I think it's evolving. I think that because it's evolving and because it's really, really good, it goes hand in hand with being challenging to get in because, there's only so many spaces. And I think having someone like yourself, Larry, is very instrumental. I understand it as a parent, but hopefully if you would like to get more information, and those out there, if you'd like more information about how this works, if you're thinking of a move in, we're going to put our information below. My information is always on our podcast. Go back. You can watch all other 60 plus episodes, but Valeria's information is below. And if you just got some questions, please, when you watch this podcast, DM us, add them in at the bottom of the video, and we'll endeavor to answer them. And this will be a constant evolving process, as I'm sure in 5 years from now, the city will be even more, ahead than it is today. I really want to thank you. It's a Friday afternoon. I really want to thank you for coming in and doing this with me today. It's great. I think it's really beneficial, and I hope you guys have enjoyed watching it. So thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you again for the invite. I'm completely flattered, and now where's the bubbly?
It's a pleasure. Well, now let's get to it. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned soon for another Better Decisions podcast.